Good morning, students. So, in the last class, we were talking about the social milieu in the 20th century. So, these are the points we discussed in the last class. We will quickly go through all those points. We were discussing about the first part, first 4 decades, starting from the steam age to we are moving from steam age to nuclear age, and we talked about the industrial development and a movement towards mass democratic and mass consumerist society, and how there was this industrialization which got a new temper and texture, and it was basically the Edwardian era. We have already discussed all these things. He was the son of great Queen Victoria, and his reign spanned from 1901 to 1910. And then we talked about the social reforms and the rise of labor movement, rise of feminism and socialism during this period. All those a whole raft of technological and scientific advances. And later we talked about the destructive power of new machine age, which was reflected in Great War. And basically, we were discussing or we were stressing on the point that it was actually the continuity from Victorian era, that there was all these reactions against religion, morality, all these things had actually started in Victorian era itself, and in Edwardian times we see a continuity in the attitudes. Even when you talk about the political stage, we see the rise of middle class and working class, which had already started from the age of Victoria, Queen Victoria. And then we talked about all those suffragette movements, and then we talked about the expansion of the empire, how Britain became remained as superpower. So I am still stressing on the point that all these things, all these trends started, all these social political trends started from the Victorian age itself. And it was during the Edwardian times, it actually expanded all these things. Britain remained as superpower. And now we are moving to the next section. So, till now, we were discussing all those continuity from the Victorian era. Now, we are talking about the notes of discord with Victorian era. So, we should say that beneath the apparent smooth continuities from the late 19th century, there was another story which was beginning to unfold even at the start of the century. This apparently robust health of the nation was showing signs of failing on number of fronts. So the literal poor health of many British recruits who were rejected as unfit by the army for the Boer War. So we are going to discuss Boer War. So there was this rejection of all those British soldiers because of their poor health. That was actually a reminder of widespread poverty and malnutrition in the country. And it was also suggestive suggestive image of, of an underlying weaknesses in Britain's situation at war. So Boer War was actually an eye opener in various fronts. What is this Boer War? Boer was where a group, it is considered to be, they were considered to be descendants of Dutch colonists in South Africa, and they had moved from this British dominated Cape Colony across Orange River, and they settled here. And Britain later annexed this region, though they allowed them self government. But there were ongoing tensions between Boers and Britain because Britain had identified there was it was in 1886 that there was this discovery of gold in the lands of Boer, and that increased the tension between Boers and Britain. And in it is said that in 1899 Britain went to war with Boer, and they had this spirit of patriotism in them, and they believed that it will be something like they will get a swift victory and it will be a decisive victory for them. But it was not like that. It is said that the whole affair took around 2.5 years, and it took the life of around 4,50,000 British soldiers. So they thought that it was just the war will be over within a matter of weeks, but it took around 2.5 years, and they lost these many lives, and it actually was an eye opener for them. And we should say that there was a series of defeat in Boer War. It actually taught them that their might, their power can be easily defeated. Till then, they believed that they are unassailable. They cannot be defeated. They are impenetrable because, as I said earlier, were actually the superpower. But a minor war like this Boer War, made them realize that they are not unassailable, and they understood that their power can be challenged. Along with that, we should say that Britain's economy was still growing steadily, but it was growing slowly when compared to major international competitors like Germany, France, and America. And this international trade markets were increasingly coming under pressure from these countries. And the staple industries mentioned earlier were strong and successful, but they were not making the same rapid productivity and efficiency gains as their competitors abroad. So, we should say, in retrospect, the Edwardian period appears to be the point at which Britain's Victorian development finally peaked. It went to its heights and began to fall back. So many Edwardians seem to have sensed this, that there was this actual improvement in their standard of living as compared to the past. But along with that, they sensed that they are living through a period of serious decline. So this is somewhat a paradoxical perception. They understood that there was on one side there was this actual improvement, but along with that there was a serious decline happening. So it actually produced some kind of frustrations in the great promise of Britain's Victorian success, and it actually led to many other movements, like there was this significant rise in emigration to other regions. Starting there are all these people started emigrating to America, Canada, and Australia. And along with that, we should say that there was this strong reactions to the decline. Like at the same time, we saw that there was a significant rise in social and industrial protest with increasingly militant agitation on the part of suffragists, socialists, and trade unions. And there were many defensive reactions against this, like all these protectionist tariff impositions on goods from outside empire. What is this protectionism? Protectionism is actually something like a theory of shielding one's country's domestic industries by blocking all those foreign competitors by taxing them. So, these were the defensive mechanism they used. They imposed protectionist on goods from outside British Empire, and along with that, we see that all these passionate form of patriotism and militarism became institutionalized. It took the form of an organization such as National Service League, British Brothers League, and in youth organization like Boy Scouts. On all sides, we should say that the optimism and faith in progress that had characterized the Victorian period had clearly begun to give way to something like a crisis of confidence. And we can say that it found expression, acute expression, in much of the literature of this period. For example, Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness. So the symbolic title itself, the title Heart of Darkness, it is actually registered a growing sense of discomfort over Britain's imperial adventures. So, in fact, the debate about the health of the nation, sparked off by the Boer War, was matched by a broader political debate about the social, economic, and moral state of the nation. A debate which, in many ways, reprised the condition of England. So, in fiction, this gave rise to an Edwardian version of the condition of England novel. There were all these novels which talked about the condition of England, and there are works of E.M. Forster, Howard End, and H.G. Wells' Tono Bungay. And for example, in Wells, H.G. Wells sums up the country's present condition as October foliage before the frost nip down the leaf. It was something like an October greenery before the frost coming in. So that was Wells summing up the condition of England. So he says that Britain represents the most unpremeditated is unplanned, subtle, successful, and aimless plutocracy. Plutocracy is actually a group, a ruling class who rules or who uses power which is actually derived from their wealth. So he says Britain actually represents the most premeditated, subtle, successful, and aimless plutocracy that ever encumbered the destinies of mankind. So these are the things which restricted the destinies of mankind, the destiny of the future human beings. So we see along with that we see a political evolution. There were a lot of liberal reforms and we see the rise of labor. So it should be said that it is a paradox that in in such an air of pessimism, which it actually produced an endorsement of liberalism, free trade, and reform in the landslide election victory for liberals in 1906. So this brought to an end to 10 years of continuous Tory rule and brought to power one of the most radically reformist government Britain had ever seen. It also saw the election of first Labour MPs and the birth of Parliamentary Labour Party. And between 1906 and 1914, this Liberal government introduced a series of landmark reforms, which included all those introduction of state-funded old age pensions in 1908, state-funded state-funded sickness and unemployment benefits. It is National Insurance Act 1911, provision of free school meals for children of the poor in 1906, control on wages of sweated or unregulated forms of labor in 1909, labor exchanges for the unemployed in 1909, and all those prison reforms such as the introduction of a system of probation. It was in 1907. So this system of probation is actually providing a transition for all these prisoners when they go back to normal life. However, we should say that despite of all these reforms, all these parliamentary reforms, there are other serious and social there are other serious social and political problems which these liberals couldn't resolve. So there was this widespread industrial unrest over low wages, poor conditions, and uncertain employment, with ever crippling rail, dock, and coal strikes in early 1910s, and many violent confrontations between workers and authorities. And particularly in specifically in 1911, two strikers were shot dead by troops, and there were various numbers of industrial disputes. And it is said that some commentators felt that England was actually ripe for revolution by 1914 if the war had not broken out at that point. So, if not war, there would have been a revolution in England. And now comes the Great War, and the world changes. So, we term, we term First World War as Great War because only after the Second World War that we used the term First World War. Before that, it was termed as Great War. So, talking about the Great War, we should say that various complex international tensions led to the outbreak of war in 1914. So I hope you know all these things. You might have dealt with all these things in world history. So all these tensions, international tensions, led to the outbreak. We have this Western European powers were actually competing in trade, industrial development, and colonial expansion since the start of the century. And Germany, in particular, had ambitions to overtake Britain as the world's dominant economic, naval, and imperial power. and they started making all those alliances. So we have this triple alliance of Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy on one side, and this triple alliance, it is known as triple entente of Britain, France, and Russia on the other side. So we should say that there was a specific event. It was the event which happened in Sarajevo, Bosnia on 28th June 1914, which sparked this great war. It was the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. And after that, Austria Hungary declared war on Serbia. Russia mobilized to defend Serbia. Germany declared war on Russia and then also on France when she mobilized in support of Russia. And Germany later marched on France through Belgium, and it was this violation of Belgian neutrality which actually triggered Britain's entry into the war. It was in 4th, it was on 4th August 1914. So again, we should say that so now England is in Great War. And in the initial point, like the start of the Boer War, Britain was engulfed by a huge wave of popular patriotism, as we have seen when we discussed Boer War. So, when they went to Boer War, they had this high spirit of patriotism, which made them believe that they are invincible, they cannot be defeated, and that war will be over by a matter of weeks. But it went on for over 2.5 years. So that same spirit of patriotism, that high spirit of patriotism, again, they didn't understand from their earlier mistake. They were engulfed with that passionate spirit of patriotism and nationalism, and they went on. It was something like a frenzy rush of war. And it was said that in all those war rallies, we hear the patriotic song of Britain, that is land of hope and glory, which was, it is said that it rang out through the streets of London, and around 500,000 men volunteered for the army in the first month itself, and with a million volunteering by the end of 1914. And these are the poetic words of Rupert Brooke. So he says, "Now God be thanked who has matched us with his hour and caught our youth and wakened us from sleeping." So these words are filled with the spirit of passionate spirit of patriotism. So here it's a poet singing praise of Great War, and all those who participated in that war, they were actually giving their life in honor of their land. So there was this air filled with patriotism, and they had a hope that this great war will be over by Christmas. Just like what they believed in Boer War, it will be over in a matter of weeks. Here they believe that it started in August and it would be all over by Christmas. But it is said that it is known that the war went on for more than 4 years, claiming over 9 million lives, with around 2.5 million British casualties, including almost a million died. So they have this trench warfare on Western Front, extending from Swiss frontier to Belgian coast. It was actually a deadlock and mass graveyard for soldiers from both sides. So I would like to show you a small video on trench warfare.
What was life like in the trenches of World War I? Soldiers lived in narrow trenches dug into the ground. The conditions were horrible. Let's have a look. Boredom was a constant problem. Soldiers carried out their chores and tried to catch sleep whenever they had the opportunity. Soldiers on the front line were far away from home and their families. They wrote diaries and letters to record their experiences. Trenches were smelly and full of water. Standing in the water too long often caused a disease called trench foot. Rats, the size of cats, infested the trenches, feeding off dead bodies. As well as this, lice sat inside clothing, causing itching and trench fever. Shell shock was a frequent trauma caused by the fighting and bombing of the front line. Symptoms included panic attacks and blank stares. Of course, disease wasn't the only danger. Soldiers were in constant fear of snipers and artillery. Popping your head above the trenches was incredibly dangerous, so periscopes could be used while on watch. Going over the top to attack the enemy into no man's land was the most dreaded order a soldier would hear. Now you know a bit about what life was like for soldiers in the trenches during the First World War. Watch our other videos to learn more. Get your copy of Simple History World War I, available on Amazon now.
So
Have you ever noticed how some people just light up a room from the moment that they walk in? Now, if you've ever
So back to the lecture. So as I said earlier that there were this huge loss of life, and we should say that it was it was partly the result of new technology like the addition of the machine gun and more powerful artillery. So this was the first experience of industrialized warfare on a mass scale, and we see the use of gas in trenches and later tanks. Along with that, there was his first major submarine campaigns at sea, aerial bombardment by Zeppelin airships, military use of aeroplanes, and this was not actually the sort of war anyone had expected. And the idealistic dreams of glory, as we see in the words of Rupert Brooke, all those idealistic dreams of glory and heroism, which was the first waves of young volunteers, started shattering in the face of brutal, unremitting mechanized slaughter. So all those romanticized conception of war was lost forever in the trenches. So we have this poet Wilfred Owen talking. In his words, he says, "My friend, you would not tell with such high zest to children ardent for some desperate glory the old lie. It is sweet and fitting to die for one's country." So that is the Latin version from Horace. So it was published posthumously after the death of Wilfred Owen in 1920. So even when you talk about Rupert Brooke, who praised praised war, great war, he actually died of blood poisoning on a troop ship before seeing action. So, all these idealistic young writers didn't actually survive to revise their romantic conception. And as we discussed, it is the war that shook England for the first time. So, although we should say that this was the first war in living memory in which British Isles were themselves under direct attack with all those early sea bombardments on the east coast, aerial raids by zeppelins, and later aeroplanes. Such attacks were relatively few and far between, and as were all those resulting casualties. And along with that, we should say that food rationing were not introduced until the final year of the war, although the prices were increased drastically over 4 years. And along with that, we should say that many families inevitably suffered from having lost their only breadwinner to the war. And there was this shell scandal which happened in May 1915 when there was this outcry over the lack of ammunition for British soldiers in France. And it actually initiated a massive expansion in the arms industries, which helped to maintain full employment and created many new employment opportunities, particularly for women. So it actually opened more avenues for women. So it brought all those women into paid work. So it is one of the uh, major social event during this period, bringing women to paid work. So in addition to bringing women into paid work, we see that British society started, that government started intervening or taking direct responsibility for a whole range of social policy such as housing, education, and employment. So, immediately after the war, for example, the government took direct responsibility for supporting the unemployed and provided them either work or maintenance. And we have all these acts like 1918 Representation of the People Act, which actually extended the franchise to all men over 21 and to women ratepayers over 30, increasing the electorate from around 8 million to 21 million. And as you know, it was in Paris Peace Conference actually concluded the war and give all those punitive reparations on Germany. And it is said that all those punitive reparations which was given to Germany actually sowed the seeds of the Second World War. So that is a next story we should deal with. So we should say that the horrors of Great War actually spawned anti-war groups, many anti-war groups, and like there is this Peace Pledge Union which was established in 1934, and it there was this widespread desire for peace and disarmament which led to the development of all these anti-war groups, and it actually influenced Britain's policy of appeasement in the late 1930s. So it should be said that we should conclude by saying that the Great War actually changed the whole dynamics of English society. After the Great War, the English society changed forever. In its in its in all the minute fabric of English society was changed by this great war. So in this class we were discussing points of discontinuities from the Victorian era. In the last class, we were talking about all those uh, continuities from the Victorian era. Today, we have talked about the discontinuities and we discussed World War and its implications. So, I hope you got an understanding of the social milieu of the early 20th century. If you have any doubts, I constantly repeat this. If you have any doubts, please contact me. Please be free to contact me. And in the next class, we will be moving to the literature during this period. So, thank you, girls. Have a nice day.